some motor running. Head out on the highway, looking for adventure, and whatever comes our way. Yeah, darling, go make it happen. Take the world in a loving embrace. Fire all of your guns at once and explode into space. Like a true nature's child, we were born to be wild. We can climb so high, I never wanna die. Born to be wild. Born to be wild.
The Bengal Club. Set up in 1827 as a meeting place where people from the military, the judiciary, businessmen and professionals of the British Empire gathered together. Independence brought about a change in clientele, but not in character. Professionals, businessmen, people from the service sector, bureaucrats, and academics started rubbing shoulders in the corridors of this hallowed institution. Welcome to the library of the Bengal Club, an institution within an institution. A veritable collection of books, the like of which you're unlikely to find anywhere else in the city, and indeed in this country. Recordings by famous speakers who have spoken here in the library, and a collection of books on any subject that you may want to look for. Books by Nobel laureates, books by Bengal Club members, books on political science, philosophy, ethics and morality, food and drinks, sports and culture. Mention the subject and it's available here. There is also a small Wi-Fi corner where you can browse the internet in peace. They say there is no subject under the sun. If you're looking for a book, you will find it on these shelves of the Library of the Bengal. Envy the books, enjoy the collection, but above all, celebrate in the ambience of this wonderful library, the Library of the Bengal Club. Welcome to see the other famous individuals who have launched their books on this site, and recordings of that book launch are also available in this library. Welcome to the Library of the Bengal Club. On behalf of the Library Subcommittee, welcome to this program.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's program. May I please request our President, Sri Kunal Shen, to do the introduction.
Thank you, Chaitali. Good evening, dear members, ladies and gentlemen. I have been given the honor to do this introduction tonight, and I can assure you that you all have gone through many events in Bengal Club, but this would be an unusual experience for all of us. As the name suggests, Hanoi to Woodstock with Dr. Harish Mehta and Krosswindz. There will be some live music also. To introduce Dr. Harish Mehta, Dr. Harish was just a 15-year-old student at La Martiniere College, Lucknow, when Woodstock happened. Within a couple of months, he and his friends were listening and dancing to the anti-war music, and I can well see out of his dress tonight, that was performed at the festival. It was perhaps these impulses that drew him to specialize in the history of Vietnam. Dr. Harish was awarded the PhD degree by McMaster University in Hamilton, Canada, in the history of American foreign relations and Vietnam, with specializations in the 20th century history of China and Christian-Muslim encounters in the early modern world known as the Ottoman Empire. He did graduate studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill after a bachelor's degree from the University of Lucknow and a postgraduate diploma from St. Xavier's College, Bombay. Dr. Harish has taught at McMaster University, University of Toronto, and Trent University in Canada in courses such as Vietnam Wars, US Foreign Relations since 1898, and so on. He is the author of 5 books on South Asian history. His articles on Vietnamese diplomacy have appeared in the academic journals of International History Review, Diplomatic History, Peace and Change, The Historian, The History Compass, and so on. He has won major awards, the Samuel Flagg Bemis Research Award twice from the Society for Historians of American Foreign Relations. The next award which he got was the Asian Print Media Right Award in 1997 by the Asian Media Information and Communication Center, Singapore. The Freedom Forum Fellowship awarded in 1995 by the Freedom Forum of Washington, D.C., and the Journalist of the Year Prize awarded in 1988 by the Press Foundation of Asia, Manila, and Mitsubishi Corporation, Japan, for the excellence in reporting economic and political developments in Southeast Asia. He has presented papers at major conferences in the United States and Canada at annual conferences. And he has also delivered lecture where the US Department of State Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and former Secretary Henry Kissinger delivered lectures at the same conference. Harish began his study of Vietnam as a senior correspondent of the Straits Times Group of Singapore from 1987 for more than 20 years. He has traveled to Vietnam more than 100 times, interviewing government officials, prime ministers, and Communist Party leaders. Harish can read Vietnamese, so it is not difficult for him to do research in that country. His wife, Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta, has accompanied him on many of his visits. She has used her time in Vietnam researching the cultural links between India and Vietnam. When it comes to Dr. Julie Mehta, it would not be complete. My introduction will not be complete if I not say a few words about her. Her contributions to the society, her contributions to the art, to the literary world has been invaluable. So, as Bengal Club, she is a member and we have been greatly benefited by it. Her interviewing the scholars who have written books for their literary excellence have always been reviewed by Telegraph and has come in a big way for all that she has done. Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta is the author of Dance of Life and co-author of Strongman, The Extraordinary Life of Hun Sen. She is doctorate in engineering and South Asian studies from University of Toronto. Currently, she teaches masters English at Loreto College. Her contribution, again I repeat, have been invaluable. Today we also have Krosswindz, which also requires no introduction, because we all know Krosswindz. It's a rock folk fusion band, and they have played all over India and abroad. And today, Harish's talks would be matched live with music by Krosswindz. So without much ado, I would now request Dr. Harish Mehta to come on the stage, and ladies and gentlemen, let us give a very big hand to him.
So thank you for that very lavish, I'm not sure a very deserved one, but a very lavish introduction. President Kunal Sen. So before I begin, I need to thank a few people. I of course need to thank President Mr. Kunal Sen, First Lady Ruma Sen, Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee, who's the chair of the library subcommittee, and all the sub-library committee members, Professor Uma Das Gupta, who I think whose interest was greatly sparked by this topic in the beginning, and Mr. Sumit Ray, Dr. Nandini Ray, CEO Mr. Dinyar, and of course my friend Mr. Gurudas, who helped a great deal with the technical aspects of this, doing the video and audio together, and also Sibanti, Ms. Sibanti Sen-Gupta from the library, who's a librarian. And I also recognize my dear friend, Foreign Secretary Chris Srinivasan, for his long-standing interest in Southeast Asia and his own contributions to diplomacy. I think I've covered most bases. The last but not least would be a little mention of Krosswindz that have their own Southeast Asian connection. They've traveled to Vietnam as representatives of some sort of musical diplomacy. And on these trips, they've covered, I think, both Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, and also to the Philippines, as well as to England and other places. We'll be hearing from them a little later. So without much ado, I would like to begin this presentation in the interests of time. I'm not sure if we need this couple of lights though. So before we get into the talk per se, a quick look at what happened in Vietnam. And this is a lecture that would take 2 whole semesters, which have been distilled into one slide. So you have, that's the map of Vietnam. In 1858, France completes the colonization of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. They do this initially appearing there as missionaries, traders, and then with military power. And they reach a stage where then they occupy the entire country. They have no interest of leaving. They see this as their balcony in the east, having lost ground in most parts of the world, where they haven't quite got a colonial foothold in India, being latecomers. So they zealously hang on to this property of theirs, which is Indochina. So in 1954, Ho Chi Minh was the chairman of the Communist Party of Vietnam. He creates the Viet Minh, which is a militant force that actually defeats the French garrison at Dien Bien Phu. So this defeat came as a shock to Western power. It exposed the shortcomings in French military strategy, which was to garrison rather than to fight guerrilla warfare. The Geneva Accords of 1954 divide the country into 2 halves. As you can see, the light brown part on top and the part without color at the bottom. So that's at the demilitarized zone later on, the partition line of July 1954. The whole deal was that the Americans who've replaced the French as the colonial authorities in South Vietnam intend to now hold on to that property. The whole arrangement under Geneva was that the country would not be divided. The division was temporary. Elections were to be held within 2 years. And then there were no elections held because the Americans knew that Ho Chi Minh would win them hands down. His stature was like that of Gandhi or Nehru in India. You couldn't defeat them in an election. So the Geneva Accords are thrown to the winds, and the country is now de facto divided into North Vietnam under the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, or North Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh, and the southern part of Vietnam, or South Vietnam, or the Republic of South Vietnam, which becomes a client state of the United States, where the United States then in 1964 begins to start sending ground troops after manufacturing on the flimsiest of excuses that, you know, our ships have been attacked on the high seas. So then there's war breaks out, and in 1968 the North Vietnamese, and so in the south the North Vietnamese have created an organization called the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, the NLF-SVN, which is derogatorily referred to by Americans as the Viet Cong. The so-called Viet Cong is not a separate entity really. It is separate to the extent that it operates in the south, but it takes its guidance and directions from North Vietnam. So it's under communist tutelage, and it carries out the role and objectives and the aims and ambitions of Ho Chi Minh's party. So what was the Tet Offensive? The Tet Offensive comes at a time when General William Westmoreland and President Lyndon Johnson have been boasting publicly that the war in America is going wonderfully well. We are about to win the war. But this comes as a great shock because the Tet Offensive, the combined forces of North and South Vietnam, deliver a shocking attack on 53 major cities across Central and South Vietnam. And this leads to Johnson, within a week, resigning. He slumps down in his White House table, and there's a famous picture of him half fallen on the chair, on the table, and that's the end of Johnson. So you have Nixon coming in, who comes into power on the promise of peace with honor. There is no peace and there is no honor. While he's talking peace and honor in the front house, in the back, Kissinger is escalating the bombardment of Vietnam. There are documents to prove this. And in 1970, anti-war movement is picking pace in Washington campuses, which leads in 1970 to the National Guard killing students at the Kent State. You'll remember that very well. So against this background, the Americans under Nixon are quite exhausted in continuing the prosecution of a war which they clearly recognize as unwinnable, and so they begin peace talks in Paris with the North Vietnamese. They do not bring the South Vietnamese allies into the peace talks. They've been betrayed. They've been dumped or thrown under the bus. So now the whole game from 70 to 73 is between the North Vietnamese on the one hand, negotiating in Paris with people like Henry Kissinger on the other. And then, of course, you see in 1975, the end game is the fall of Saigon, because the forces of North Vietnam, once the peace agreement signed in 1973, the Americans begin withdrawing their forces, but they have no bargaining power to tell the South, to tell Ho Chi Minh's forces to remove themselves from South Vietnam. They don't have that leverage. So the peace agreement is signed with this great loophole, which leaves the de facto fighting forces of North Vietnam in the South. They use the period from 73 to 75, the 2-year period, to begin step by step occupying different cities across Vietnam till April 1975, when the famous picture of the Americans of leaving Saigon and flying out. So the earliest movement, music in support of Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh, his fighting wing, is the Scots a singer called Evan McCall. He played the Ballad of Ho Chi Minh. He wanted to show that, to tell his comrades in the West that the Viet Minh is not a nakedly aggressive communist regime. It consists of the whole core of this Communist Party of Vietnam is not naked communist aggression, but nationalism. So there was this whole academic debate about what was communist Vietnam. Was it communist really, or was it nationalist? And a lot of scholars now swing to the other side to believe it was communist, but they fought the war on the nationalist plank to eject the country from imperialist control. So we'll quickly just listen to this little ballad that Evan McCall played in honor of Ho Chi Minh.
Far away across the ocean, far beyond this resistant realm, there's some man who is father of the Indo-Chinese people, and his name it is Ho Chi Minh. Ho 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 Chi Minh, ho 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 Chi Minh. From Viet Bac to the Saigon Delta, from the mountains and the plains below, young and old workers, peasant at the toil and pen, farmers fight for freedom with Uncle Ho. Ho 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 Chi Minh, ho 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 Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was a deep sea sailor, served his time out on the seven seas. Work and hardship were part of his early education, exploitation his ABC. Ho 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 Chi Minh, ho 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 Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh came back from sailing, and he looked on his native land. Saw the want and the hunger of the Chinese people, foreign soldiers on every hand. Ho 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 Chi Minh, ho 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 Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh went to the mountain, and they formed a determined band. Heroes all sworn to liberate the Indo-Chinese.
I think that gives us enough of a flavor of where this performer back in 1954. Now, the Americans are still not in the picture, but he's decided that he foresaw the coming of a greater imperial power. These people have it in them. So, so this is my book, which I produced based on a history of Vietnam, based not from the American perspective, because there's a lot more being done on that. And so I used mainly Vietnamese, South Vietnamese, and Northwest Vietnamese historical archival documents to put forward this argument that Ho Chi Minh, at a conference of Vietnamese diplomats in 1964, had said that diplomacy is not only a concern for embassies and consulates, but also for foreign trade, culture, youth, women, and trade union agencies, which are equally responsible for diplomacy. So this talk, how does it fit in here? It fits into Ho Chi Minh's own overall parameters of how he saw diplomacy. Musicians were an active part of Ho Chi Minh's people's diplomacy. He was constantly sending Vietnamese performers abroad, not just to the communist world, but to countries in the West which still welcomed them. You could not travel to America, for instance. You could travel to the UK under the Labour government. You could always travel to, and they were always traveling to, the Scandinavian countries. Of course, the source for this particular document is from a speech he delivers to those diplomats, and this is in the archives. So broadly, there are certain themes and theories on the music of the Vietnam War. Firstly, music as an instrument of diplomacy, and we'll see that as this talk progresses. There's a formation of identity, who we are, through music. The American icons that you'll hear, the Woodstock guys, who were described as hippies, were differentiating themselves from the suits who sat in Washington, D.C., who were prosecuting these criminal war policies. They could not dress like them. And so the Americans were highly confused. Who are we? Because the war in Vietnam exposed, it blew holes in the American own idealistic policy that America is a home of democracy, a beacon of democracy and peace, and it stands for global good. Now, what was going on under Johnson and Nixon was quite the opposite. And so this inflamed all these young people, and who turned completely, and this music was an expression of their anger against the official position. So there were 4 types of musics in the Vietnam War. The first was Vietnamese revolutionary music. You will hear one short clip from that in this presentation, which was patriotic on the one hand, to tell men and women to not just take care of the domestic front, but to take care of the war front. And for men to give more of themselves, not to think of their personal comforts, but to sacrifice their lives easily. South Vietnamese were producing what the North Vietnamese called yellow music, Nyak Vang, which was banned in the North because they felt this was a colonial derivative, that this was a terrible, there's a word that the North Vietnamese had for the South Vietnamese, Nui. Nui means traitor. It's worse than traitor. It's a leech, a scum, a common vermin. Repeatedly, a lot of Vietnamese scholars keep in the archives, they describe the South Vietnamese as Nui, and of course they had even worse words for the Americans. On the American side, you had pro-war music, which I'll come to in the next slide. And then, of course, there's American anti-war music, some of whose composers were not hard rock musicians, but classical performers like Leonard Bernstein, and light rock groups as Peter, Paul, and Mary. So we'll just come to that in a second. And to continue this little bit about discourses and theories in American war music, there's, of course, one of the major things is the lack of nationalism. The Americans were not nationalistic. These performers were not patriotic. They just blamed the American government. They could not be patriotic to such a war effort, which was killing not just combatants in North Vietnam and South Vietnam, but annihilating entire forests, bombing hospitals and sanatoria, schools, villages. The other thing was the idealized concept of the American identity lay fractured. So I've just talked a little bit about, the whole image was distorted by American presidents who subverted their own democracy. The African Americans who were fighting there as very, very good warriors, and they were sent to Vietnam. But on the other hand, in the homeland in America, people like Stokely Carmichael, who were workers for the African American cause, Stokely Carmichael were, for instance, talking about that the same white man that is killing black girls in the cotton fields of Alabama now is sent to North Vietnam and South Vietnam to kill young Vietnamese girls for having done nothing wrong. So there was the merging and a conflation of racism. They said it's the same racism that we face here that the Vietnamese face there. So there's this other thing about Heidegger, there's just a little thing I've thrown in. He talked of a concept called surature, which means erasure, which means to delete. Deleting a word but allowing it to remain just legible. So words, because words when man came on earth first, we didn't have words for anything. We didn't know that was a rock. So words are in any case inadequate for the concept they represent. So what was surature here? It was mockery, disrespect for the American flag in Jimi Hendrix's Star-Spangled Banner. It was such a riff on, it completely distorts with such a lot of dissonance this very, very beautiful song, that it turns it into sounds of wailing, helicopters, bombs falling. It brings out the viciousness and the warlike nature of the American presidency. So there was erasure. They rewrote the Star-Spangled Banner. Hippies talking Hegel. So tenured professors such as Herbert Marcuse, Angela Davis, Noam Chomsky and others were written off as hippies because they opposed the war. I think I don't have time to get into all this Frankfurt School, Herbert Marcuse's theories on art. But one important point is that his theories underscore my argument for the necessity of anti-war songs like Crosby, Stills and Nash's Ohio, which spoke loudly and angrily and boldly against the Nixon administration. Marcuse basically saw in art and music an ability to invoke the illusion of beauty or the space or promise of a different reality. So that's what these musicians were doing, because they were constantly impressing upon the leadership to bring the troops back, to stop killing them, and that was what they were doing. So they were pro-war songs. Now, these were the older American musicians, World War I and World War II generation. They knew no better. Patriotism was everything else. Fried chicken, steak on Sundays, and hello Vietnam, Johnny Wright. We must stop communism in that land or freedom will start slipping through our hands. They even bought into the domino theory, which was highly discredited, that fires we don't put out will bigger burn. And so, oh mama, tell them what we are fighting for. Them here is those anti-war troublemakers. Tell them what we are fighting for. Tell them that we are fighting for the old red and blue, or red, white and blue. Did they forget Pearl Harbor and Korea too? So here is this document which has never been shown publicly. This is from the Vietnamese archives in Vietnamese, and the gist of this document is, it concerns a Canadian-American pianist, Anton Curti. So in June 1966, when US pastor and anti-war activist A.J. Must, who was invited and he agreed to visit Hanoi, could not come, he recommended Curti's name. So the North Vietnamese thought it was a sufficient substitute, and so they agreed to invite him, and he'd moved to Canada anyway in 1965 to protest the American bombing of Vietnam. In Toronto, he performed at a concert. So I play a little bit from him. Sorry for the advertisements. Yeah. Let me just move a little bit ahead. So the protest music in the United States begins a few years before Woodstock happens. Phil Oakes, What Are You Fighting For? 1963. So, this song will speak for itself.
Oh, you tell me that there's danger to this land you call your own, and you watch them build the war machines right beside your home. And you tell me that you're ready to go marching to the war. Oh, I know you're set for fighting, but what are you fighting for? Before you pack your rifle and sail across the sea, just think upon the southern part of land that you call free. Oh, there's many kinds of slavery, and we found many more. Yes, I know you're set for fighting, but what are you fighting for? And before you walk out on your job and answer to the call, just think about the millions who have no job at all. And the men who wait for handouts with their eyes upon the floor.
There's another performer called Tom Paxton, who was very critical of Lyndon Johnson for promising peace on this campaign trail and then sending troops to Vietnam. It's a short bit from him.
I got a letter from LBJ. It said, "This is your lucky day. It's time to put your khaki trousers on. Though it may seem very clear we've got no jobs to give you here, so we are sending you to Vietnam." Lyndon Johnson told the nation, "Have no fear of escalation. I am trying everyone to please. Though it isn't really war, we're sending 50,000 more to help save Vietnam from Vietnamese." I jumped off the old troop ship and sank in mud up to my hips. I cussed until the captain called me down.
So there's this singer called Pete Seeger. I found some documents also in Hanoi and in the American archives. He had this song called "Bring 'Em Home." He died, he lived long. He lived on till 94.
Well, now, you don't have to sing on this song if you don't want to. If you like the idea, though, you can help me out. If you love your Uncle Sam, bring 'em home, bring 'em home. Support our boys in Vietnam. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home. It'll make our generals sad, I know. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home. They want to tangle with the foe. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home. Here is their big palisade. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home. They don't have the right weaponry. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home.
Final song is from this black musician Nina Simone, 1967. So she wrote this song where she speaks for the black community that, you know, you're raising our taxes, freezing our wages, and sending my son to Vietnam.
Just who do you think I am? You raise my taxes, freeze my wages, and send my son to Vietnam. You give me second-class houses and second-class schools. Do you think that all colored folks are just second-class fools, Mr. Backlash? I'm gonna leave you with a backlash blues.
This is a page from my book on the people's diplomacy of Vietnam, which talks about that the Democratic Republic of Vietnam creates a hospitality policy for anti-war foreign visitors, classifying them into two groups, A and B level groups, because it was very important. They had to get them, and so it was not just the musicians they were paying for. If Noam Chomsky came, he got A-level treatment. But if rank and file anti-war activists were very welcome, they'd be shown around, but they wouldn't get their air tickets. They'd get B-class hotels. Not that I think Hanoi had no A-class hotels anyway. So this is the Vietnamese reference citation from this A and B policy. And this was the first time this policy ever appeared outside the Vietnamese archives. So, why was Ho Chi Minh trying to get these people in? He was appearing on the cover of Time that was painting him out, and painting his country out as warmongering stooges of the Soviet Union in the Cold War, a country that was rabidly communist, that was trying to erase all traces of democracy, first from South Vietnam, this glorious regime that was backed by the United States, and then that domino would fall, and then Thailand would be the next to go, then Malaysia, and then Singapore, and Lee Kuan Yew. They were all jumping up and down, fearing this great, monster that, the domino theory would happen. But Ho Chi Minh wanted them to come and see the real face of the Vietnamese people, that they were not rabid communists, that they were very poor, that they were normal mothers, daughters, children, brothers, fighting against this brutal military machine. And so when these foreigners came, they didn't see any of this, the way, they saw a different portrait. But the writer Susan Sontag sometimes felt, and she visited, and she wrote that she found that it was all very nice, that what you're doing there, you got a just cause, but she had a problem with the shrill tone of communism, which tends to propagandize to the extent that it becomes difficult for them, when Susan goes back to America, to convince people, because your tone is all wrong. Well, that was her point of view. So this Pete Seeger, this great musician, folk performer, this is an archival document. So at the invitation of the Vietnamese Musicians Association and the Vietnamese Committee of Solidarity with the American people, Seeger arrived in Hanoi recently. He was welcomed at the airport by comrades of the associations. 5 days stay. He visited an exposition of photographs about US war crimes. So they were very organized, the North Vietnamese, in showcasing all these things, museums, whatever weaponry they could get their hands on, they took them to see all these tanks and other things that they could find. So this is some more details about how Pete Seeger was invited. The the Vietnamese Committee for People's Unity has to, before Seeger can come, write a letter justifying why he should come. Why is he important? Why should we spend our dollars? And so this committee is telling the Prime Minister's office, he's important because he's famous for anti-war activism. He wanted to come, but we couldn't accommodate him. Now he wants to come with his wife and daughter. We thought he could contribute to the anti-war movement, etc., etc. So he's coming for 10 to 14 days in March 1972. Now, who is Seeger? Seeger had actually helped Bob Dylan get started in the music industry. He was a big name. So now, it's not that the North Vietnamese were not producing their patriotic songs. So there is a little bit that I've got from the Smithsonian Library, a short little clip of which will give us a flavor of the music of North Vietnam. This is a reproduction from the Dang Cong San Vietnam, which is the Communist Party of Vietnam, and recently they published this article reflecting on what had happened, and they remembered Evan McCall's The Ballad of Ho Chi Minh that we just heard. They heard Pete Seeger's Teacher Uncle Ho. They remembered a Chilean musician's song, etc. So this brings us to 1969. January, Richard Nixon becomes president. August, Woodstock Festival is held in New York State. In September, Ho Chi Minh dies at the age of 79. Well, this became the anthem song of Woodstock.
Well, I came upon a child of God. He was walking along the road, and I asked him, "Tell me, where are you going?" He told me, said, "I'm going down to Yasgur's farm, gonna join in rock and rollin'. Got to get back to the land that set my soul free. We are stuck."
New York Times played Ho Chi Minh's death as a page one lead story. And they remembered, they said that, even though he's gone, they have a strong leadership under Les One, and we expect the war policies to hold. Les One was from the south, but he believed in a quick victory. He did not want to wait, for the north to strengthen itself economically. There were two groups then. The North Vietnamese had a South First group and a North First group. The South First group argued on Les One for let's not wait to develop ourselves. It'll take forever, and so let's get on with it. So now Joan Baez flies to Hanoi in December 1972. Basically, she's bringing mail for American prisoners of war who are held in North Vietnam, and the North Vietnamese will give access. She will allow to meet them. She will be allowed to meet them. So when she lands as a guest of one of the committees, she comes under attack, and we'll hear a little bit of that. Original soundtrack.
My name is Jim Rickards. I'm a former advisor to the CIA, Department of Defense, and the White House. In a moment, you'll have
the sound in the background is
It's walking to the battleground that always makes me cry. I've met so few folks in my time who weren't afraid to die, but dawn bleeds with the people here and morning skies are red as young girls load up bicycles with flowers for the dead. An aging woman picks along the craters and the rubble, a piece of cloth, a bit of shoe, a whole lifetime of trouble. A sobbing chant comes from her throat and splits the morning air. The single son she had last night is buried under her.
Jane Fonda arrives. This is from Nanxian, the army newspaper of Vietnam. She arrives again carrying to meet American prisoners. She again comes under, she's taken to a deep trench, and while she's down, while they're showing her around, she comes under attack as well. So this is, again, now the reference to Vietnam is very, 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 very evident in this song from this band called Country Joe and the Fish.
Well, come on, all of you big strong men. Uncle Sam needs your help again. Got himself in a terrible jam way down yonder in Vietnam. Put down your books and pick up a gun. We're gonna have a whole lot of fun. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up the pearly gates. Well, there ain't no time to wonder why we're all gonna die. Now come on, Wall Street, don't be slow. Man, this is war a go-go. There's plenty good money to be made, supplying the army with the tools of the trade. Just hope and pray that if they drop the bomb, they drop it on the Viet Cong. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up the pearly gates. Well, ain't no time to wonder why we're all gonna die. Now come on, generals, let's move fast. Your big chance is here at last. Now you can go out and get.
So final 2 slides. This is the second last one. Woodstock was the coming out party of the rock and roll generation, according to the folk singer Richie Havens. The festival's first performer, he remembers it as the beginning of the world, as far as he is concerned. He had to play longer because they couldn't find Santana. Richie Havens had a 20-minute slot, and they said Santana is coming on, but they couldn't find him. So that was that. And so anyway, Joan Baez returns after 41 years. She returns to see, to remember her visit when she came under bombing.
Oh, freedom! Oh, freedom!
The American folk singer and anti-war activist Joan Baez has returned to a bunker in Vietnam where she spent 9 days sheltering from ferocious American air raids in 1972. She was in Hanoi when it was the capital of North Vietnam 40 years ago as part of a peace mission when American B-52s unleashed the so-called Christmas bombings. The bunker where she took refuge was forgotten after the war but was unearthed again in recent weeks.
It was my first experience with dealing with my own mortality, which I thought was a terrible cosmic arrangement. I thought it's okay for everybody else to die, but surely there was another plan for me, you know. And so it just came so close so many times, and it changes you.
Back at the hotel 40 years on, Joan Baez was reunited with staff who were working there at the time, including the manager and the hotel's hairdresser. They remembered the trip that led to the experimental album, Where Are You Now, My Son?
So this is the last slide, and the most amazing thing is the number of songs written about the Vietnam War during the war outnumbers the total number of songs written about all of America's other conflicts. Well, for whatever that is worth. So thank you so much for listening.
Could I please request Dr. Debashish Dotto to offer the vote of thanks?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You'll probably all agree with me, this was actually a unique and a marvelous event. We all enjoyed this, and all on the behalf of Bengal Club and Bengal Club Library Subcommittee, I would like to express our gratitude to Professor Harish Mehta. I can't see him, it's here. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank all the people who has worked behind the scene tirelessly. There was a lot of effort has gone into this program, and we are all very grateful to all of them. And thanks to all of you for being here, sparing your time, and we all enjoyed it together. And I must say thank you again to Dr. Mehta. Can I request Professor Uma Dasgupta to come up and give a token of appreciation to Dr. Mehta?
Harish is not off the hook, though. I think you have to face some questions.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Harish.
Please,
very much.
just probably go inside to take a picture.
Okay.
I will now make the floor open. You can ask any questions to Dr. Mehta is here. Please, sir.
What was unique about the Vietnam War that it resonated into so much public protest?
Yeah. Well, it's a tough question to answer, but I would think because it's a very good question. The Americans, Eisenhower used to say that America has no interest in Vietnam beyond its little bit of tea and some rice, which was of great importance to the Japanese economy. And therefore, Vietnam, the war in Vietnam should not have had that importance. But coming out of a defeat in Korea, and coming out of a stalemate in Korea, and I'm not sure if any of those objectives were attained. So when you come out of a stalemate, the lessons you drew was, do you want another partition? Do you want a North and South Vietnam? So I think it was a place to take a stand. And the Cold War had intensified. And so under the Cold War, all these Cold Warriors from Robert McNamara, you see, they began to talk about domino theory. No longer was Vietnam just important for its tea and rice exports to Japan, but it became something so massive. It became the final cog that would, if you removed it, the floodgates would open to sink all of Southeast Asia under communism. So it became a point where the West fought the Soviet Union, Soviet bloc, in many ways, ideologically, in military ways, because then they had to turn it into something. It wasn't that, you see. And in retrospect, it was none of those things. It wasn't. There was no domino theory. Robert McNamara has repeatedly told us how he was wrong. He's apologized, but what is an apology? And are you apologizing because you're sorry for bombing them? No, you're a sorry figure because you misunderstood and misled your country down a path it had no business of going, down that kind of path. So it was a failure in the end of the entire American worldview. So and we think that he's apologizing for the bombardment. I don't think he's sorry for that. I mean, Kissinger still remains bloody-minded.
Yes, sir, Prof.
To what extent do you think To what extent do you think the protests had to do with the draft and the fact that Americans were dying and the fact that to some extent the press coverage of the Vietnam War graphically describing the consequences of the bombing and, for instance, Agent Orange, etc. I mean, that ignited the campuses to some extent, didn't it? I mean, it wasn't just that these guys were saying, oh, it's a bad war. These guys were saying, I don't want to die. I don't want to go there and die. So it was more me rather than you're in a bad war. Just as a question.
Yes, so I'm not sure, you're right. A lot of it was not willing to go, not willing to fight anyway. But I think a lot of young Americans were moved by the wrong sort of war. They all queued up to join, to fight for the Second World War and the First. They wanted to go, being there, getting out there, but not now, not this time. I think they were moved by American insincerity. They were moved by all of the things they were saying about the war. And it was actually not a good war. The Second World War was a good war. You were fighting Nazism. But this wasn't. This wasn't a great war. And
untruth that you speak of also happened in the case of Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction that were discovered. So the same McNamara lies were evidenced in the era of Bush. But there were no public protests during the Iraq war that one saw or read about during the Vietnam era. So there's something to this puzzle. I was probably too young, but there's something to this puzzle that misses me entirely.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. Why does this happen that American protests we don't hear of them the way we did? I think it may have to do with the kind of the atmospherics, as Kissinger calls it, the atmosphere on the campuses. It's a different world out there now. People are there only to make money. Young people enrolling go there with a sense of entitlement. Their dads and mums are paying $40,000 a year for a course. They come to me to say, why do I get a C? The whole thing is that I need an A because we paid for it. So I don't think that commitment is there. I think those people are not there. And there's obviously fatigue, how many wars, how many times what's the Dylan number? So, I think there's fatigue. There's also the whole atmosphere has changed. People have changed. Times have changed. You don't get this kind of music anymore. Who listens to music and wants to kind of tear up employment letter from IBM or from who's the big bomb maker? DuPont, the big Canadian companies who have offices in Sarnia, the makers of Agent Orange. Well, you got a good job with producing Agent Orange, go for it. Yes, Anida.
Harish, first of all, let me compliment you for that fantastic presentation. A very unique dimension that you used to project this whole Vietnam War.
Thank you.
My question was that, for some reason, not much is known of the ripples that this had on China and how China reacted. There have been references, made to the utter disdain with which China looked at all this thing, but not much known of what actually happened and what didn't. But there is some reason which has left a very deep, in Vietnam, they're very antagonistic about the Chinese. Politically, they aren't. China is supposed to support Vietnam. Vietnam invites investments and so on and so forth. But as in terms of people-to-people relation, you know, China and Vietnam is tremendously antagonized. It's left a deep, indelible imprint on, on China-Vietnam war, I mean. Is there anything that you can...
Sure, absolutely. I think that's a very, very important factor. You know, being a neighboring country with this northern giant China, it's not possible that China didn't have a role to play in the war. And it did have a massive role. And that role boils down to the fact that China was a bigger donor of economic and military aid to North Vietnam during the war than the Soviet Union. The old Western archives used to believe that it was the Soviets who were the bigger provider. We always believed. But then there are documents to show that no, that wasn't the case. It was the Chinese who were giving more. In fact, the Dien Bien Phu war, Ho Chi Minh could not have won without Chinese tanks. They were just sending them. Truckloads of equipment and operators to run those, at that time, sophisticated units. So China helped a lot in the liberation in the 1954 war, and that aid continues through the 60s.
Why this deep hatred now?
But then China was calibrating its supplies every time North Vietnam swung slightly towards the Soviet Union. Chinese aid would decline. And when they swung back, it would rise again. So there was this game being played by the two sides. There were times when Soviet diplomats were being treated quite badly in Hanoi by the Vietnamese. So they came under pressure from both sides. So currently, they don't like China for what it's doing in the South China Sea. You know, that whole, the whole building of islands and the rivalry over the oil installations.
Thank you. Thanks, Harish, for adding.
Thanks.
For bringing in this clarity.
Thank you. Nice question. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. I think your active participation and enthusiasm makes this event better. Before we ask Krosswindz to come, big hand for Dr. Mehta, please. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. We are Krosswindz, and we're going to be playing some songs from the 60s, and especially songs from the Woodstock Festival. We hope you have a good time tonight. We're starting off with a song by Creedence Clearwater Revival, better known as CCR. They played this song also at the Woodstock, so you might recognize this. Just
Turn
like to do a song by Joan Baez. Some of you might know this one. She made quite a mark in the Woodstock Festival with her lovely ethereal vocals.
May God make and keep you always. May your wishes all come true. May you always do for others and let others do for you. May you build a ladder to the stars and climb on every road, and may you stay. May you grow up to be righteous. May you grow up to be true. May you always know the truth and see the light surrounding you. May you always be courageous. Stand upright and be strong. And may you stay. May your hands always be busy. May your feet always be swift. May you have a strong foundation when the winds of change show. May your heart always be joyful. May your song always be sung. And may you stay. May God bless and keep you always. May your wishes all come true. May you always do for others and let others do for you. May you build a ladder to the stars and climb on every rung, and may you stay.
We'd like to do a song by another very great band from the 60s. They even played the Woodstock, but strangely, when you see the film, the Woodstock film, their footage seems to be missing. That's because they had a very brief stint. They went on stage and they played a couple of songs. The band was the Grateful Dead. And while they were playing their song, unfortunately, there was a mishap on the stage. They got electrocuted. So we hope none of that happens tonight. So they had to cut short, but we'll play a song by the Grateful Dead. They did play around 3 songs that night at Woodstock, but they have not been documented in the film. So we'll do one now, a song by the Grateful Dead.
I was trailed by 20 hounds. I didn't get to sleep that night. The morning came around. I set out to run. I take my time. Friend of the devil is a friend of mine. If I get home before daylight, I just might get some sleep tonight. Ran into the devil. He owed me 20 bills. He took my $20 bill. He vanished in the air. I set out to run. I take my time. Friend of the devil is a friend of mine. If I get home before daylight, I just might get some sleep tonight. Got 2 reasons why I cry awake each lonely night. First one named Sweet Aunt Mary, she's my heart's delight. Second one is prison baby, sheriff's on my trail. And if he catches up with me, I spend my life in jail. First one named Sweet Aunt Mary, she's my heart's delight. Second one is prison baby, sheriff on my trail. And if he catches up with me, I spend my life in jail. Got a wife in Chino, maybe one in Cherokee. The person said she got my child, that it don't look like me. I said I run, I take my time. Friend of the devil is a friend of mine. If I get home before daylight, just might get some sleep tonight.
We'd like to do a song by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. They made their debut actually a few days before Woodstock, so this was kind of like a godsend for the band, CSNY. They went on to become like a second Beatles almost. So sing along if you know this one.
Helplessly hoping her harlequin hovers nearby, awaiting ever gasping at glimpses of gentle true spirit. He runs, wishing he could fly, only to trip at the sound of goodbye. Wordlessly watching him waits by the window and wonders at the empty place inside. Heartlessly helping himself to her bad dreams, he worries, he hear a goodbye, or even hello. They are one person, they are two alone, they are three together, they are for each other. Stand by the stairway, you'll see something certain to tell you. Confusion has its cost. Love isn't lying, it's loose in a lady who lingers, saying she is lost and choking on her love. They are one person, they are two alone, they are three together, they are for each other. Thank you. Okay, the next artist that played and really made an impact over there was none other than Carlos Santana and his seminal group, the Santana Group. And we're going to be doing a song that they popularized, but it was actually a Peter Green song. Everybody knows this one. We're going to jam on this and really let it all hang out. Thank you.
He had acid, huh? Oh, right. Santana also dropped acid. That was a good observation, right? In fact, he said something now after that. He almost forgot what he had to play.
Someone told me long ago, there's a calm before the storm. I know it's been coming for some time. When it's over, so they say, it'll rain a sunny day. I know, shining down like water. Have you ever seen the rain? I wanna know, have you ever seen the rain coming down sunny day? Yesterday and days before, sun is cold and rain is hot. I know, been that way for all my time. Till forever on it goes, through the circle fast and slow. I know, it can stop by wonder. I wanna know, have you ever seen the rain? I wanna know, have you ever seen the rain coming down sunny day? I wanna know, have you ever seen the rain? I wanna know, have you ever seen the rain coming down sunny day? Thank you.
Where would we without Bob Dylan? There's nobody, no greater poet than him. Song by the great Bob Dylan now.
She's got everything she needs. She's an artist. She don't look bad. She's got everything she needs. She's an artist. She don't look bad. She can make the dark out of the nighttime and paint the daytime black. You start out standing, proud to steal her anything she sings. You start out standing, proud to steal her anything
Will I do a song by Janis Joplin now? Janis.
You say that it's over, baby. You say that it's over now. Still you're hanging around. Come on, won't you move over? You know that I need a man. You know that I need a man. But when I ask you to, you just tell me that maybe you can. Now please don't you do it to me, baby. Now please don't you do it to me, baby. They take a lot by it ain't correct for walking, no, no. It ain't correct for walking. What can I do? Your life, you make up your mind, darling. You're playing with me, yeah. You make up your mind, you're playing with me. Come on now, now if you need my loving, honey, I said, let me, honey, let me be, hey. You say that it's over, baby. You say that it's over now. But still you're hanging around. Oh, come on, won't you move over? You know that I need a man. You know that I need a man. But when I ask you to, you just tell me that maybe you can. Now please don't you do it to me, no, 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 no. Now please don't you do it to me, baby. Now take the love by your honey, let me be.
Okay, I just want to kiss the sky now. Not really. I'm going to play a song by the guy who redefined what electric guitar really means. We wouldn't have this instrument as it is built today if not for Mr. Jimi Hendrix serving on do a little humble tribute thing for him. Look out now. Ooh, yeah.
Purple haze all in my brain. Hazy days don't seem the same. Acting funny, I don't know why. Excuse me while I kiss the sky. Purple haze is all around. Don't know if I'm up or down. Never happy, misery. Whatever it is, that girl put a spell on me. Purple haze is in my brain. Hazy days don't seem the same. Acting funny, I don't know why. Excuse me while I kiss the sky. Purple haze is all around. Don't know if I'm up or down. Never happy, a misery. Whatever it is, that girl put a spell on me.
humble take on Jimi Hendrix.
Satisfaction. I can
Well, the next song is actually more of a quiz question than a song. We're going to play this thing, and we want you to guess which song this is because it's one of those really renowned pieces of music which I think is going to go down in history as a bit of classical music in another decade or so. Thanks a lot. Any guesses which song that was? Good job, good job. Yeah, that was our little improvisation on that song. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that John Lennon song. One second.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no country. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to care, Lord died for, and no religion do. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us in the world we live as one. Imagine no possession. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger.
we're going to do one last song before we pack up. It's been wonderful playing for you, all of you. It's been a wonderful event. You're really unique event. We've had this after a very long time, I think. Let's do AG. Okay, we want everybody to join and sing this song because it's a very simple melody and we can all sing it.
Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. Remember to let her into your heart. Then you can start to make it better. Hey Jude, don't be afraid. You were made to go out and get her. The minute you let her under your skin, then you begin to make it better. And anytime you feel pain, hey Jude, refrain. Don't carry the world upon your shoulder. Well, you know that it's a fool who plays it cool by making his world a little colder. Na 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 na. Hey Jude, don't let me down. You have found her. Now go and get her. Remember to let her into your heart. Then you can start to make it better. So let it out and let it in. Hey Jude, begin. You're waiting for someone to go home with. And don't you know that it's just you? Hey Jude, you do. The moment you need is on your shoulder. La 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 la. Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. Remember to let her under your skin. Then you begin to make it better, 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 better. Wow!
Let's hear you now. La 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 la. Hey Jude. La 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 la. Hey Jude.
Thank you. We've been Krosswindz. You've been Bengal Club. It's been wonderful playing for you. We'll see you again.